Hi, my YouTube family, and a special hello to all the night owls and youngsters out there. Welcome back to Crime Whispers. I'm here to guide you through another chilling case. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, get comfortable, settle in, and let's dive into Case 1, The Disappearance of Cassandra Cannell, Part 1. A sibling bond rooted in horror. Cassandra and Robert were twins who grew up sharing a love for the eerie and the strange. As kids, they often sat in the dark telling each other scary stories, and Robert, a gifted storyteller, always played the brave little hero in his tales. They were obsessed with Scooby-Doo, collecting villain figurines, and reading every spooky storybook their mother, Mary Smith, brought home. She may not have shared their passion, but she supported it. Their dream, opening a horror-themed bookstore together. Cassandra's fascination with horror eventually led her to a small acting gig. In 2004, she landed a cameo in a low-budget horror film. The role wasn't big, and the movie didn't gain traction, but it was enough to spark jealousy in Robert. He wanted in, so Cassandra promised to get him a role in her next project. But even minor acting proved too much for Robert. Meanwhile, Cassandra's co-star, Colin Dudley, a charismatic actor with a flair for dramatics, became enamored with her. Part 2. A party, a costume, and a dangerous crush at a company Halloween party. Cassandra came dressed as Velma from Scooby-Doo. Colin, ever the performer, channeled Alex from A Clockwork Orange, complete with glass of milk and eerie monologues. He stopped in front of Cassandra and declared, "Your beauty makes me want to destroy it." She took it as a quirky compliment. They started dating, but the relationship was short-lived. Within months, Colin moved on to another actress named Rebecca, and the two eventually moved in together. Part 3. The Vanishing. On August 25, 2020, Cassandra suddenly vanished. Her mother, Mary, couldn't reach her and went straight to the police. A search began immediately. Days later, Cassandra's car was found abandoned beneath a bridge, unlocked, keys still inside. It was an area known for crime and homelessness, and no one in the vicinity had seen her or recognized the car. Detectives tried tracking her phone. The last ping came from the water near the bridge. Divers were sent to search the area. Cassandra's mother mentioned her daughter had a rhinestone-covered phone case, which helped the divers locate the device, but there was no sign of Cassandra herself. Part 4. A devastated mother. A hidden truth. Mary was crushed. Not only had she lost her daughter, but she had been preparing to become a grandmother. Cassandra had been pregnant. The nursery crib was still in its box in the garage. Mary had no idea who the father was. Cassandra wasn't married and hadn't spoken of a boyfriend. Still, police suspected foul play. Statistically, many crimes against pregnant women are committed by the father of the child. A breakthrough came when police found a close friend of Cassandra's. That friend confirmed something shocking. Cassandra had rekindled her relationship with none other than Colin Dudley, her old flame from 2004, although Cassandra had hesitated to tell Colin about the pregnancy due to his past comments about not wanting children, especially since his partner Rebecca was infertile. She eventually told him over the phone. Colin said he was happy, but his tone had been strange. Part 5. The Investigation. Narrows detectives visited Colin's home. Rebecca answered the door, but when Colin stepped out, it seemed like he had already anticipated the visit. He thanked the detective for not mentioning Cassandra in front of Rebecca and admitted he had been seeing Cassandra in secret. He claimed not to know where she had gone, and even brought up an argument Cassandra had with her twin brother Robert, suggesting that could be relevant. According to Colin, Cassandra had wanted to meet with him the day she vanished. He'd refused, citing personal reasons. Now, he expressed guilt, wondering if her disappearance could have been prevented had he agreed to see her. Part 6. A Double Life. and a growing secret. During his second interview with detectives, Colin Dudley opened up more than anyone expected. He spoke about death, guilt, and the afterlife, saying he believed he might be punished in the other world for what he'd done. He confessed that after his father's death in 2014, his relationship with Rebecca, his live-in partner, had soured. She'd clashed often with his father, and after the funeral, Colin began to question everything. His father had warned him that Rebecca wasn't right for him, and now, with the weight of grief pressing down, Colin began to feel his father might have been right all along. In a moment of reflection, or weakness, Colin decided to reach out to Cassandra once more. What began as a reconnection slowly turned into a rekindled affair. But to keep it hidden, Colin led a double life for 5 years. He lied to Rebecca constantly, fake business trips, fabricated overtime hours. He even went as far as buying a fishing rod just to support the illusion that he was spending time at the lake. In reality, he was with Cassandra. He would buy fish from the supermarket and bring it home for Rebecca to cook, even though the smell made him physically ill. Then, everything changed. Part 7. The pregnancy and Colin's breaking point. Cassandra had told a close friend the truth. The baby she was carrying was Colin's, but Colin had his doubts. He believed Cassandra may have moved on. When the detective asked when Colin had last seen Cassandra, his answer was vague. He said it must have been 3 or 4 months ago. A quick encounter at the mall, while Rebecca tried on clothes. Colin claimed he got bored and walked to the coffee shop, where he bumped into Cassandra briefly. Before the interview ended, Colin asked the detective a question that chilled him to the core. "Do you think there's any chance she's still alive?" The officer simply replied, "We're doing everything we can. Please believe that." But what came next would change everything. Part 8. Surveillance, suspicion, and a vanishing truth. Though Cassandra's phone was water-damaged and unusable, detectives pulled her call logs. One number stood out: Colin Dudley's. She'd called him frequently, even on the day she disappeared. CCTV footage from a railway station near the abandoned car added another layer of suspicion. A man, covered head to toe, stood on the platform, trench coat, scarf over his face, wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His walk, his posture, eerily familiar. It reminded the lead detective of Colin. He entered a nearby coffee shop briefly before walking toward the parking lot and driving away. Cameras couldn't catch his face, but they did capture his license plate. That was enough. A search warrant was issued, and officers headed to Colin Dudley's home. Part 9. The search at first glance. The house gave up nothing. No obvious signs of violence, but tucked away in the back of the wardrobe, officers found something suspicious. The same hat worn by the man in the station footage. Then they discovered a basement. There was no body, no visible crime scene, but a cadaver dog began barking wildly. The scent of blood was unmistakable. Still, Colin insisted on his innocence. He said the police had no real evidence and were framing him in search of more answers. Detectives turned to Rebecca. She was blindsided. The raid, the affair, the lies, it all shattered her. When asked if she believed her husband was capable of murder, she went silent for a long time and finally whispered, "No." But silence doesn't mean innocence. Part 10. Digital trails and hidden truths. Though the evidence was thin, police weren't ready to give up. When Colin was brought in again, he claimed to have an alibi, that he'd gone to a hardware store at 6:30 a.m. on August 25th, the day Cassandra vanished, and bought trash bags and cleaning chemicals. The store's cameras confirmed the visit, but the purchases raised red flags. That same day, Cassandra had sent Colin a text message saying she was on her way to his house. He'd deleted the message, but the phone carrier retained it. Cell tower data painted a clearer picture. Colin and Cassandra's phones had remained at his home for several hours. Colin's phone had been turned off, but Cassandra's was left on, likely by mistake. That gave police a digital trail. They traced Colin's movements to a nearby cafe, where they believed he may have washed up after the murder. Then, he drove to the bridge where Cassandra's phone was later recovered. Still, they needed more. Part 11. The breakthrough came from the GPS tracker in Colin's vehicle. Detectives followed his route from that fateful day. It led them deep into the forest. In a ravine, they found a large trash bag tied with rope, dumped beside a bloody trail. Inside was Cassandra, though she'd been gone for a month. Police identified her from a tattoo detailed in the missing person report. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death: blunt force trauma to the skull. She had been beaten to death. Colin Dudley was arrested the same day and charged with murder. Part 12. The verdict during the trial. Police laid out their case, motive, timeline, digital evidence. But without a witness or murder weapon, it wasn't airtight, so the court offered a plea deal. If Colin confessed, he'd receive a reduced sentence, and he agreed. Colin Dudley was sentenced to 26 years in prison for Cassandra's mother, Mary, and her twin brother, Robert. The sentence was a hollow victory. They still struggled with guilt, wishing they'd seen her one last time, wishing they could have done something more. But what haunts them most is the thought that one day, Colin might walk free. Part 1. A dedicated life and a fading relationship. Reagan was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. In his early 20s, he made the noble decision to serve his country by joining the military, stationed near Marquette, Michigan. Christopher dedicated himself to protecting peace and order. It was during this time that he met Terry O'Donnell, a kind and intelligent local teacher from Iron River. The two crossed paths often and built a friendship that lasted for years. Eventually, Christopher left the military and relocated to Traverse City. But distance didn't end their connection. In fact, it deepened. By December 2012, Christopher asked Terry to take things further. With shared values and strong chemistry, the two decided to live together and start fresh in Iron River. A quiet town, they believed, would be the perfect place to settle down. Christopher soon landed a job as a supervisor at a factory manufacturing military ship parts. But after 2 years, the relationship began to unravel. The couple struggled to resolve their issues, and ultimately, they decided to part ways. Despite the breakup, they remained on good terms, wanting to move on. Christopher rented his own place and began applying for jobs across the country. By October 2014, he was offered a new position in Asheville, North Carolina. Part 2. The day everything went silent, and October 14th, Christopher reached out to Terry, telling her he'd taken the next day off and was looking forward to meeting her for a walk. But on October 15th, Christopher never called. Terry became increasingly worried. She tried calling him for several days, with no answer, and even contacted mutual friends. Finally, 10 days after his disappearance, she filed a missing person report. At first, police suggested that Christopher may have simply moved on, perhaps started his new life in North Carolina, and didn't want to contact anyone from his past. But something didn't add up. Investigators quickly reached out to his new employer, and were stunned to discover that Christopher had never shown up for work. He'd been missing for 10 days. Part 3. Searching for a ghost. Knowing Christopher enjoyed solo trips into the woods, officers suspected he may have had an accident. Search dogs combed the forested areas near Iron River, but there was no sign of him. Terry suggested police check his old apartment. There, they found the interior in disarray: clothes scattered, closets wide open. While officers initially chalked it up to untidiness, Terry insisted Christopher was always neat and organized. This wasn't like him. The deeper investigators dug, the more uneasy they felt. Then came a breakthrough. Christopher's car was found 8 miles outside of Iron River, parked near the city limits, an odd place for him to leave it. The doors were unlocked. Inside, everything seemed normal, until an officer spotted a small yellow paper on the passenger seat. It was a handwritten set of directions. Part 4. The route to a dead end. The note outlined a route, no specific address, but filled with clear landmark-based directions. According to Terry, Christopher knew Iron River, but not its street names, which explained the note's reliance on bus stops and gas stations. This was his first visit to the location. Following the directions, investigators arrived at a house in a nearby town. When they knocked, a man named Jason Cochran answered the door. His wife, Kelly Cochran, joined shortly after Dot. Police explained they were investigating a missing person, Christopher Reagan, and that a route found in his vehicle led directly to their home. Jason and Kelly seemed confused, but agreed to speak with detectives. Kelly acknowledged that she knew Christopher from the factory where they both worked. She even admitted to texting him in mid-October, but said she never heard back. Jason also agreed to cooperate. At first, there were no red flags. Detectives thanked the couple and left. Part 5. The truth unfolds, but something didn't sit right. Investigators interviewed Christopher's co-workers, and that's when the story changed. A supervisor revealed that Christopher and Kelly Cochran were having an affair. And not just any affair, it was an open secret at the factory. That revelation put everything in a new light. When Kelly was brought in for another round of questioning, she confessed to the affair, but claimed Jason had approved of it. She said she couldn't reveal this earlier because Jason was in the room, but her story quickly unraveled. When detectives questioned Jason alone, he denied ever agreeing to the affair. In fact, his anger and disgust at Kelly's infidelity raised serious suspicions. Police now believed Jason may have had a motive, but without hard evidence, the investigation stalled. Jason and Kelly were released. For 5 long months, the case went cold. Part 6. A new detective. A dark history. In March 2015, Detective Jeremy Ogden from the Hobart Police Department took over the case. His first step was to dig deep into the Cochran family's background. Kelly and Jason had been together since high school. They moved in shortly after graduation and had drastically different personalities. Kelly was outgoing, talkative, and bold. Jason was quiet, introverted, and brooding. Detective Ogden suspected that this wasn't just a missing person case. It was something far more sinister, and soon he'd be proven right. The Kelly Cochran case, quiet and reserved. Jason Cochran was not one to initiate conversations. He only spoke when spoken to. Yet, despite their differences in personality, Jason and Kelly decided to get married. Following their wedding, the couple launched a small swimming pool maintenance business. It wasn't wildly profitable, but it earned enough to live comfortably. Jason handled most of the physical labor, but over time, the strain on his body began to take a toll. He developed serious back issues and started gaining weight. Eventually, it became clear he could no longer keep up with the demands of the job. Kelly stepped in to take over, hoping her husband would recover and rejoin her. But his health continued to decline, and conventional medical treatments weren't helping. In desperation, Kelly began researching alternative treatments. She eventually found a plant-based remedy that offered hope, but there was one problem. The plant was banned in their home state. In 2014, the couple decided to relocate to Iron River Township, Michigan, where access to the treatment was legal. That same year, Jason began seeing a doctor for pain management, while Kelly landed a job at a local factory that manufactured components for US warships. Coincidentally, it was at this factory that she met Christopher Reagan. Christopher Reagan enters the picture. Christopher was friendly, easy to talk to, and in a tough emotional place. His growing friendship with Kelly soon turned into something more. What began as light conversation turned into secret meetings. Their affair remained hidden for a while until Christopher suddenly vanished. Authorities launched an investigation based on early leads. Prosecutors presented a case to a Michigan judge and secured a search warrant for Kelly and Jason's home. A disturbing discovery on March 6th. A team of investigators combed through the Cochran residence. They didn't find physical evidence of Christopher's fate, but they did find something chilling. A self-published book, written by Jason under a pseudonym, *. The book, set in a dark fantasy world, described in haunting detail the murder of a man who had wronged the protagonist. One of the characters bore a striking resemblance to Christopher. Detectives began to wonder, was Jason drawing inspiration from real life? Just 3 weeks later, a second search was conducted, but when police arrived, they found the house abandoned. The Cochran home was empty. No cars, no sign of life. They had fled. Investigators soon discovered the couple had left Michigan and relocated to Indiana, with Kelly and Jason now out of state. The investigation stalled. A shocking 911 Callan, February 22, 2016. Police in Hobart, Indiana, received a frantic 911 call. It was Kelly. Her husband, Jason, she claimed, wasn't breathing. When paramedics arrived, Jason was slumped in a chair. His face looked red and flushed, as if he'd overheated. Despite attempts to revive him, it was too late. Jason was pronounced dead at the scene. Kelly appeared panicked and distraught. His body was taken for a full forensic autopsy. In the meantime, Kelly was escorted to stay with nearby relatives. Autopsy results raised red flags during a search of their Indiana home. Investigators found a syringe near the foot of the couple's bed. Initially, they suspected a drug overdose. Toxicology reports did reveal multiple substances in Jason's system. But the official cause of death shocked everyone. Strangulation, bruises on Jason's neck and face confirmed it. Suddenly, Kelly Cochran wasn't just a person of interest in Christopher Reagan's disappearance. She was now the prime suspect in her husband's murder. Closing in on February 23, 2016, Kelly was brought in for questioning. Investigators pushed hard, but Kelly denied everything. She claimed Jason had overdosed. As weeks passed, detectives still lacked the hard evidence needed for a conviction. That's when a break came from an unexpected source. Walter Hammerman, Jason's close friend, contacted police. He told them that he didn't believe Jason died of an overdose. Jason, he said, had been using herbal remedies for pain, not hard drugs. In early 2015, Jason had told Walter that he and Kelly were being questioned in connection to Christopher Reagan's disappearance. The pressure had affected him deeply. Walter described a sharp change in Jason's demeanor. He became withdrawn, constantly anxious, and avoided people. Walter also shared another troubling detail. Kelly was increasingly dominating Jason's life. The trap with this new information, Detective Jeremy Ogden came up with a plan. He asked Walter to help. On March 12, 2016, Walter, wearing a wire and under police surveillance, called Kelly. He told her that Jason had given him a sealed letter with instructions to turn it over to police if anything ever happened to him. Instead of acting surprised or cooperative, Kelly's response caught everyone off guard. She coldly asked Walter to forget the whole thing. The trap didn't produce a confession, but it told detectives something else. Kelly was hiding something. Over the next few weeks, Kelly underwent repeated interrogations. Each time, she denied involvement in both deaths. Then, on April 26, 2016, Kelly disappeared. She slipped past law enforcement yet again. The manhunt begins. Federal manhunt was launched. Authorities from both Iron River and Hobart joined forces to track her down. Walter Hammerman, who had helped set the trap, was now terrified. He believed Kelly might come after him next. Meanwhile, investigators were racing against the clock to bring her in before she vanished for good. Kelly had vanished. It seemed, leaving investigators convinced she was deliberately hiding her whereabouts. She fled Hobart and resurfaced over 6 hours away in Wingo, Kentucky. Detectives quickly alerted local authorities, warning them to exercise extreme caution. Kelly was not only unpredictable, but potentially dangerous and prone to fleeing. On April 28th, Wingo police identified her at her cousin's house, acting swiftly and without prior warning. Officers approached the residence and arrested Kelly on site. During questioning, Kelly confessed details that shocked investigators. She claimed she had been deeply in love with a man named Jason and longed to escape the city to start a new life with him. However, things took a sinister turn on October 13, 2015, when Jason discovered she'd been unfaithful. What followed was a dark pact. Jason told Kelly that if either of them ever cheated, the betrayer must kill the other's lover. Kelly admitted she never took the agreement seriously, believing it was just a sick joke, but Jason was deadly serious. He warned her that if she didn't act, he would. The very next evening, October 14th, Christopher, Kelly's lover, came over, expecting a romantic night. The couple had dinner and went upstairs, but their evening was brutally interrupted when Jason stormed into the bedroom, wielding a rifle. In a flash, he shot Christopher in the head, killing him instantly. What happened next was grotesque. Jason and Kelly dragged Christopher's body to the basement. There, using a hacksaw, they dismembered him, removing his limbs, and placed the remains into several garbage bags. They dumped the body in the woods near Crystal Falls, and later drove off in Christopher's car to further cover their tracks. Back at the house, they meticulously cleaned every trace of the crime. But Kelly's emotional state spiraled. Though she helped Jason with the murder, she was overcome with rage not at Christopher, but at her husband. Jason had taken away the man she truly loved. That resentment turned into hatred, and it wasn't long before Kelly began plotting her revenge. On February 22nd, 2016, Jason complained of back pain. Kelly offered to give him an injection, one that would supposedly help, but the dose she administered was meant to kill him. When the medication didn't work as planned, Kelly suffocated him with her bare hands, pressing down on his mouth and nose, then squeezing his neck to finish the job. The bruises later found on his body told the full story. After her confession, Kelly cooperated with investigators, guiding them to where they had disposed of Christopher's remains. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden led a team and a K-9 unit to a wooded area near Crystal Falls. The dogs picked up a scent that led them to a small hill, where they unearthed a human skull. Bullet holes confirmed what police had long suspected. It was a homicide. Further evidence, including a broken firearm and a .22 caliber bullet, was recovered. Dental records verified the remains as those of Christopher Regan. The case that had haunted detectives for 2 years was finally solved. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of both Christopher Regan and her husband, Jason Cochran, during her February 2017 trial in Michigan. Prosecutors portrayed her as the cold-blooded mastermind behind both killings. They presented overwhelming evidence, including her own chilling confession. Kelly, however, offered a different version of events. She insisted that Jason had been controlling and abusive, and that it was he who had plotted Christopher's murder. According to her, Jason ambushed Christopher in a jealous rage and forced her to help dismember the body under threat of violence, but the jury wasn't convinced. After just 3 hours of deliberation, they found Kelly Cochran guilty of premeditated murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and transferred to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ionia, Michigan, where she remains today. Now, let's turn to another chilling case, one that shocked New York City and the nation. Sherry Sheil Kovlin was raised on Manhattan's Upper West Side and grew up with a passion for learning. She excelled academically and later earned a degree in wealth management, a field in which she quickly found success. She built a thriving career managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for clients at Swiss banks. Despite her financial accomplishments, she longed for something more. She wanted a family. That desire led her to a Jewish singles event in February 1998, where she met 26-year-old Roderick "Rod" Kovlin, who also worked in finance. The two hit it off despite a noticeable age gap. They shared common ambitions, and their relationship moved quickly. Some felt they rushed into marriage, but, for Sheil, it felt right. The couple soon welcomed two children, a son and a daughter, but behind the image of a successful, happy family, tensions simmered beneath the surface. On New Year's Eve 2009, tragedy struck. Rod called 911 in a panic, claiming he'd found Sheil unconscious in the bathtub, submerged in blood and unresponsive. He said he'd pulled her out and tried to revive her, following instructions from emergency dispatchers, but it was too late. When police arrived, they found Sheil's lifeless body, wrapped in a blanket, cold and still. At first, it seemed like a freak accident or even a possible suicide. Inside the apartment, officers found scattered children's toys and an otherwise quiet, lived-in home. In the bathroom, they made the grim discovery. But as the days passed, the truth became harder to ignore and far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Wrapped in a blanket by her husband, she Coven's lifeless body lay beside a blood-stained bathtub. The floor was still wet, and crimson-tinged water remained in the tub, clear indicators that her body had only recently been pulled from the water. A visible wound on the back of her head suggested blunt force trauma. Nearby, investigators found a broken cabinet hinge, as if she had fallen and struck her head after possibly losing her balance while reaching for the doorknob. Police found no signs of forced entry and began questioning the family. During interviews, it came to light that she and Rod Coven's 9-year-old daughter had been the first to discover her mother's body. Traumatized, she told authorities that she and her younger brother had fallen asleep in their mother's bed the previous night. In the middle of the night, she woke up to find her mother missing and went searching for her, only to stumble upon the horrific scene in the bathroom. In shock, she called out for her father, Rod Coven, who had recently separated from she, but was staying downstairs at the time, rushed to the bathroom, pulled his wife's body from the water, and called emergency services. His version of events matched his daughter's account, which initially supported the theory that she's death had been a tragic accident. Detectives informed she's extended family of her passing, leaving them devastated. An autopsy and forensic examination were scheduled for the following day. However, when the medical examiner reached out to investigators to begin the procedure, he was surprised to learn that the autopsy had been canceled. As it turned out, a rabbi from Shi's Orthodox Jewish community had intervened. According to religious tradition, autopsies are generally forbidden, as they are believed to defile the body. The rabbi contacted the Shevra Kadisha, an organization responsible for preparing Orthodox Jews for burial. They requested access to the scene and, with police permission, entered the home, cleaned the blood from the bathroom, and prepared Shi's body for immediate burial, destroying key forensic evidence in the process. Grateful for the rabbi's guidance, the grieving family agreed to forego the autopsy, and she was buried within 24 hours, in accordance with religious customs. Hundreds gathered to pay their respects. Despite the ceremony, Shi's parents grew uneasy. They questioned how a simple fall could have caused their daughter's death. The lack of an autopsy and destruction of the scene raised serious doubts. Seeking answers, they hired a private investigator to look into Shi's death. The investigator began by speaking with Shi's relatives, quickly uncovering troubling details about her marriage. After celebrating their 10th anniversary in 2008, Shi and Rod's relationship had started to deteriorate. Rod frequently switched jobs, developed a gambling addiction, and was reportedly spending excessive time on video games. Financial strain and infidelity plagued their home life. She had recently discovered Rod's online affairs and was pursuing a religious divorce. Despite their efforts to keep the peace for their children's sake, arguments persisted. She had even confided in family that Rod could be aggressive and had a volatile temper. She felt watched and uneasy in her own home. These revelations deepened the investigator's suspicions. He believed Shi's death may not have been an accident after all. determined to examine the apartment himself. He arrived at the scene with police, but the door wouldn't open with the key they had. Moments later, Rod Coven appeared, claiming he had heard a noise. He took the key and effortlessly unlocked the door himself, prompting further suspicion. Had he really just heard a noise? Or had he been monitoring the apartment all along? Inside, the investigator took special note of the cabinet hinge that was supposedly torn off during Xi's fall. Upon inspection, he concluded that she, given her physical stature, likely wouldn't have had the strength to rip off such a firmly attached fixture. He reported his findings to the NYPD, urging them to consider the possibility of murder, but police hesitated, citing insufficient evidence. Eventually, pressure from the private investigator and Xi's family led the department to reconsider. Authorities decided to move forward with an autopsy, but by then, she had already been buried. Exhumation was the only option. This decision devastated her family. In Orthodox Judaism, exhumation is strongly discouraged, and religious leaders often oppose it. Still, Xi's loved ones were determined to uncover the truth. After obtaining special authorization from the prosecutor's office and completing all necessary paperwork, the body was exhumed. The results were damning. The medical examiner concluded that Xi Kuven had not died from a fall. She had been strangled, her neck broken, and her airway crushed. The official cause of death was revised from accidental drowning to homicide. The autopsy vindicated the detective's suspicions and prompted the NYPD to reopen the case. Investigators began re-examining the evidence, including Rod Coven's phone records and the missing mobile phone she was last seen using. The truth, long buried, had finally begun to surface. Police thoroughly examined bank statements and interviewed everyone who had interacted with Rod Kovlin and Shiel Denishevsky. During the initial divorce hearing in May 2009, Rod claimed he couldn't afford spousal support due to unemployment. However, the judge dismissed his claims and ordered him to cut back on gambling and electronics. In court, Rod's true character was exposed. He relentlessly criticized Shiel, making false accusations about her finances, behavior, and parenting. He even went as far as contacting her workplace in an effort to defame her. During a subsequent hearing on July 7, 2009, the court barred Rod from being alone with the children, a ban that remained in place even after Shell's death. Custody of the children was instead awarded to Rod's parents through a social worker. This ruling, according to investigators, likely infuriated Rod. Police spoke with a former caregiver, previously employed by the Kovlins, who had been fired by Rod. They also learned that on December 30th, the day before her death, Shiel had received an expensive keratin hair treatment that required her to avoid moisture and humidity for several days, including baths and showers. The autopsy showed no signs of bathing, which investigators took as a possible indicator that she hadn't showered before she died. Surveillance footage revealed Rod leaving his apartment unusually early at 4 a.m. and returning shortly thereafter. The building's security guard found this suspicious, noting that Rod had never left at that hour before. When the guard asked if he needed anything, Rod returned a short while later with chocolate bars, a gesture police believed was a calculated move to build an alibi. At the time of Shell's death, she and Rod were still legally married, without a finalized will or divorce. Rod stood to inherit her estate, worth over $5 million. Notably, Shiel had scheduled a meeting with her attorney for December 31st to update her will and officially remove Rod as a beneficiary. Investigators believed Rod may have learned of this plan and acted to stop it. While initially unable to locate Shell's phone, a subsequent search of the apartment revealed it on her bedside table, still plugged into the charger. Police suspected the phone had been intentionally hidden or overlooked. Meanwhile, Rod had retained a lawyer who advised him to remain silent, limiting police access to direct answers. However, a review of Rod's phone records revealed frequent contact with Deborah Holmes, a married woman and mother of 3. with whom Rod had begun a romantic relationship 5 months prior. They had met at a backgammon tournament and maintained their affair both in person and online. When detectives reached out to Deborah, she refused to cooperate on the advice of her lawyer, a lawyer she happened to share with Rod Kovlin. When investigators examined Shell's recovered phone, they found that all data had been thoroughly wiped by a professional. Even forensic experts couldn't retrieve the deleted texts and messages, a major setback. Despite circumstantial suspicions, the case stalled, lacking hard evidence to arrest Rod. Years passed without progress, but then a major breakthrough came. Rod's mistress, Deborah, had recently ended their relationship and decided to contact police. She revealed Rod had been scheming to gain custody of the children because, without it, he couldn't access Shell's frozen estate. His plan, to coerce their 15-year-old daughter into falsely accusing her grandfather, Rod's own father, of sexual assault. This would, in theory, have the grandfather imprisoned and Rod regained custody. Rod even promised his daughter a large financial reward if she carried out the plan. In addition, Rod had been misappropriating funds from an account set aside for his children's education. When his parents confronted him, a serious argument ensued. Rod's anger toward them grew increasingly dark. In 2012, he allegedly told Deborah that he was considering poisoning their tea with rat poison, believing his daughter would receive a lighter sentence due to her age, if caught. His violent fantasies didn't stop there. He thought about burning down his parents' home and jamming the doors to trap them inside. At one point, he even plotted a fake marriage for his daughter to a Mexican man, hoping it would result in her handing over a portion of her inheritance to him. Deborah realized the danger she was in. Secretly, she began collecting and storing evidence, including recordings of Rod's conversations and plans. After their breakup, she handed the files over to the police. Her cooperation proved pivotal. Now armed with Rod's own words, the investigation gained new momentum. As investigators dug deeper into the case, a startling revelation emerged. In a casual conversation with a friend he met through a backgammon group, Rod Kovlin offhandedly mentioned that he had keys to Shell's apartment and could access it any time he wanted. It was the kind of slip investigators had been waiting for. More disturbing still, evidence surfaced that Rod had been plotting to frame his own daughter for Shell's death. With this new trove of information, recordings, witness statements, and Rod's own words, detectives finally had enough to make their move. On November 1st, 2015, Rod Kovlin was arrested for the murder of his estranged wife, Shiel Danishevsky. Her family, heartbroken but determined, waited anxiously for justice. But conviction was far from guaranteed. Scene: Rod confesses in jail while incarcerated. Rod began confiding in another inmate. Unaware that he was being recorded, Rod shared explicit details about how he had killed Shiel, even going so far as to reenact the strangulation, mimicking movements that closely aligned with the medical examiner's findings. In court, the prosecution laid out Rod's pattern of escalating violence and manipulation. The jury was presented with a chilling catalog of crimes, from the murder of his wife to plots to kill his own parents, and plans to manipulate and frame his children. The testimony painted a picture of a man utterly devoid of remorse, someone willing to destroy anyone in his path to gain control of his children and access Shell's fortune. In March 2019, Rod Kovlin was convicted of second-degree murder. Despite the absence of a direct eyewitness, the overwhelming body of circumstantial and recorded evidence left no room for doubt. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. For Shell's family, the verdict brought long overdue justice. Rod Kovlin would never again be a threat, not to his children, his parents, or anyone else. Transition to next case, the tragedy of Austin Haroff. Now we turn to another disturbing case, one that shocked an entire community. Austin Haroff once known as the Golden Boy, was born on December 21, 1996, in Palm Beach, Florida. He was the eldest of 2 children in a privileged, highly educated family. His father was a successful dentist with multiple clinics, and his mother a pharmaceutical executive. Their home was a large, luxurious house by the sea. When Austin was just a toddler, his younger sister, Haley, was born. The two were close, and their parents were devoted to giving them the best opportunities, nurturing creativity, education, and personal growth. Austin stood out from a young age. He was intelligent, driven, and physically gifted. He loved football, wrestling, acting, and playing the guitar. A creative soul with a bright smile, Austin seemed destined for success. Yet, despite his accomplishments, he often felt isolated, his quiet nature and social anxiety making it hard to connect with peers. When Austin was 13, his world shifted. His parents divorced, his father remarried quickly, and his mother followed suit. Though emotionally shaken, Austin remained focused. He dreamed of becoming a doctor, just like his parents. By high school, he had grown into a tall, muscular young man, but his struggles with shyness and loneliness persisted. Classmates mocked him, calling him a nerd. Austin longed for deeper connections, hoping that college would be a fresh start. That dream seemed to come true when he was accepted into the University of Florida's prestigious pre-med program. It was a milestone that felt like the beginning of everything he had worked toward. Seeing college and early signs of trouble in the fall of 2016, Austin moved to campus, documenting his experience through a personal vlog. At first, everything seemed promising. He threw himself into bodybuilding, gaining muscle quickly, though he later admitted that steroid use played a role in his transformation. He posted frequently to YouTube, guitar covers, philosophical ramblings, fitness routines. But over time, his content took a darker turn. His tone grew more erratic. His warnings about steroids became frantic. He began posting videos in multiple voices, speaking as if possessed by different personalities. At times, he would break down in tears. Viewers noticed the unsettling shift. Some suggested he was using drugs. Others speculated mental illness, perhaps even dissociative identity disorder. But Austin denied everything. To outsiders, he was unraveling. Seen, family notices changes when Austin returned home for the summer. His family was stunned by the transformation. He was bigger, physically imposing, but something else had changed. His speech became nonsensical. He claimed he didn't need sleep. He wandered the house at night, guarding his mother and sister, claiming he had to protect them from invisible threats. At first, they laughed it off. But as his behavior escalated, the concern grew. Each hour, like clockwork, Austin would check their rooms, saying things like, "You're safe. I'm here. You can sleep now." His family didn't yet know the full extent of what was coming, or how far Austin Haroff would fall. Austin had spent the night pacing, telling his family that everything was quiet and under control, guarding them, he said. But the next morning, his mother sat him down for a serious talk. She asked directly if he had been using drugs. Austin admitted he had, not just once, but over the past year, experimenting with various stimulants, including a synthetic substance known to cause hallucinations, violent outbursts, and even death by overdose. Still, he promised her he had stopped and was no longer in danger. Despite her concern, Austin's mother, a pharmacist by profession, didn't seek professional help. She believed she could manage things herself. She gave Austin sedatives and sleeping pills to help him relax and rest, especially after his long, sleepless nights. But the effect was short-lived. After only a few hours of sleep, Austin was up again, pacing, updating his family every hour, claiming all was calm. Over the following weeks, his behavior steadily worsened. Still, his mother avoided reaching out to psychiatrists or even informing Austin's father. Then, On the morning of August 13th, things took a more alarming turn. Out of the blue, Austin showed up at the home of a former classmate he hadn't seen in over a year. She was stunned, not just by his sudden appearance, but by what he said. Austin told her he couldn't remember the year he was born and was trying to find answers. Confused, she told him it was 1996. Without another word, he turned and left. The encounter deeply unsettled her. She immediately called Austin's mother, asking if he might be using drugs again. This finally pushed Austin's mother to call her ex-husband, now working in another state, and express her growing fear that something was seriously wrong with their son. Austin's father flew to Florida the next day. After spending time with Austin, he urged him to check into a clinic for a full medical and psychological evaluation. Austin refused. The father and mother then agreed that if he wouldn't go voluntarily, they would arrange for a mandatory evaluation and possible treatment, whether through a rehab facility or psychiatric hospital. But they never got the chance. The next day was hot and sunny, and some of Austin's friends invited him to the beach. His mother insisted that his sister Haley go with him to keep an eye on him. Austin was eager to join, but his outfit raised eyebrows. Instead of beachwear, he dressed as though heading to the mountains. A thick, athletic hoodie, long pants, boots, and ski goggles. His friends stared, then burst out laughing, teasing him. When they asked if he was okay, Austin snapped. He shouted that if they thought he was crazy, he'd prove it, even threatening their lives. His friends were unnerved, but didn't take him seriously. Haley, however, sensed her brother was on the edge of a breakdown. She pulled him aside to calm him down. In their private conversation, Austin made a disturbing confession. He believed he was half an immortal, and possessed superhuman strength. Though terrified, Haley remained composed, careful not to provoke him. Once at the beach, Austin seemed to snap back to normal. He joked, played volleyball, and laughed with his friends. But the mask didn't last. As the sun set, Austin and Haley walked to a small coastal restaurant to meet their father and stepmother. On the way, he told Haley he wanted to test his immortality by running through high-speed traffic. Panicked, she chased after him and physically pulled him back, reminding him they were late. He calmed down and followed her without protest. At dinner, Austin's behavior became erratic again. He repeatedly left the table to look around outside, appearing paranoid. Then, abruptly, he announced to his father and stepmother that he believed he was immortal. His father responded calmly, suggesting they seek help. That set Austin off. He exploded, shouting that he wasn't crazy. Then he shoved his father, got up, and ran out of the restaurant into the night. Austin walked for miles, until he came across a neighborhood he didn't recognize. A well-lit garage caught his eye. It was the home of John and Michelle Stevens, a retired couple in their late 50s. They had spent over 25 years together, raised 3 children, and were enjoying their golden years with simple pleasures like barbecuing and watching movies in their garage, which they had turned into a cozy living space. That night, John had taken their dog for a walk, while Michelle set up for movie night. When she saw the unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she didn't feel threatened. She asked gently if he needed help. But things took a sudden and horrifying turn. Across the street, their neighbor Jeffrey Fisher, a family friend, heard strange noises just after 9 p.m. Then he heard a scream, Michelle's scream, high and agonizing. Without hesitation, Jeffrey ran to help and found Austin near the garage. He tried to pull him away, but was overpowered and thrown to the ground. Before he could recover, Austin stabbed him multiple times in the back and shoulder, bleeding. And panicked, Jeffrey stumbled into the Stevens house, hoping to draw Austin away. He exited through the back and ran to his own home, only realizing once there that Austin had not followed him. He had gone back to attack Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called 911, reporting a violent attack and stating that both he and his neighbors had been stabbed. After the call, he paused and listened, but there was only silence outside. Then, faintly, he began to hear something chilling, guttural, animalistic growls, screams of terror, and the moaning of someone in agony. It took about 10 minutes for police to arrive, but by then, it was too late. The scene they encountered was gruesome. As 2 officers approached the garage, they stopped cold. Michelle Stevens lay in a pool of blood just inside. The autopsy would later show she suffered blunt force trauma to the head and a stab wound to the chest. Deeper inside, they found John barely alive, reaching out, pleading for help in a strained whisper. Straddling him was Austin, choking him with terrifying force. The officers raised their weapons and shouted at Austin to release the man. He did not respond. Part 1. The case of Austin Harrafoston showed no response when police arrived, and using a firearm was deemed too dangerous due to the close proximity of both the victim and the suspect. Instead, one officer drew a taser and warned Austin. Only then did it become clear Austin wasn't just attacking John. He was viciously biting his face. John was pinned down, his head and neck gripped tightly, and beneath him, a large pool of blood had spread. A chunk of flesh was missing from his left cheek, and his lip, nose, and ear appeared to be chewed off. John was immobilized, barely able to move, silently pleading for help. Officers fired the taser, but it had little effect. Austin continued to tear into John's face with his teeth. A kick to Austin's head only caused him to growl and bite deeper. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog, which was unleashed on Austin. The dog latched onto his arm, but Austin seemed impervious to pain. He broke free and injured himself further in the process. It took a powerful kick from another officer to finally disorient him long enough for officers to restrain and handcuff him. At that point, Austin said he felt unwell, claiming he may have eaten something bad. Moments later, he lost consciousness and began convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Tragically, Michelle did not survive the attack. Her husband John died en route to the hospital due to severe blood loss and extensive trauma. A neighbor, Jeffrey, who had intervened, survived, but sustained permanent nerve damage to his right hand, affecting his motor skills. Austin had apparently ingested a chemical from a garage bottle, mistaking it for alcohol. He suffered serious burns to his esophagus and stomach and was in critical condition for several days. After nearly 2 weeks in a coma, doctors were able to stabilize him. When Austin regained consciousness, he claimed to remember nothing about the incident. Over time, he recalled dining at a restaurant and having a heated argument with his father. He said he wandered off and saw a figure guiding him through dark alleys until he spotted a light near the Stevens family's garage, where John was preparing a barbecue. When Michelle saw Austin, she screamed for help. He admitted to striking her multiple times and then pulled out a knife, saying he wanted to rid her of evil. When the neighbor, Jeffrey Fisher, tried to intervene, Austin claimed he mistook him for a demon and attacked him as well. After Jeffrey fled to get help, Austin continued attacking Michelle until she was lifeless. He then found a bottle in the garage and drank from it, not realizing it contained chemicals. Soon after, he heard barking and voices, but remembered nothing beyond that point. Initially, it was believed Austin may have been under the influence of a powerful drug, but toxicology reports found no trace of alcohol, medication, or narcotics in his system. This led investigators to consider the possibility of a severe psychotic break. Court-appointed psychiatric experts, including Dr. Landrum, suggested Austin suffered from a mental illness that triggered an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the deaths of Michelle and John. However, prosecutors disagreed, arguing that Austin did not meet the legal definition of insanity at the time of the crimes. It was revealed during trial that Austin had a history of experimenting with steroids and other drugs, and struggled to connect with peers. While no substances were present in his system at the time, his mental stability may have already been deteriorating. Austin's father testified that their family had a history of schizophrenia and expressed concern that his son may have inherited the illness. One controversial theory even suggested that Austin might have suffered from clinical lycanthropy, a rare psychiatric delusion in which a person believes they are a non-human animal. This could explain his animal-like behavior and pain tolerance, though no expert officially diagnosed him with the condition. After months of treatment, Austin was transferred from the hospital to jail. His legal team continues to argue that he is mentally unfit to stand trial. The case remains unresolved, and Austin Harroff awaits trial. Meanwhile, the families of the victims, Michelle, John, and neighbor Jeffrey, maintain that Austin is faking insanity to avoid accountability and continue to call for the death penalty. Part 2. The case of Jolly Joseph. Today, we also look into a chilling case from Kerala, India, the Jolly Joseph family murders. The Thomas family lived in the village of Kottayam in Kerala. They were one of the most respected and wealthiest families in the area. The family patriarch was Tom Thomas, and his wife was Anama Thomas. They had 2 sons, Rojo and Roy Thomas. In 1997, their eldest son Roy married Jolly Joseph. Jolly quickly became the beloved daughter-in-law of the household. She was intelligent, soft-spoken, and known for her religious devotion. Despite Roy being unemployed at the time, Jolly continued her studies and later told the family she had secured a job at the National Institute of Technology in Kozhikode. Life seemed to be progressing well until 2002, when Anama suddenly fell ill. She was hospitalized and appeared to recover. But just 2 months later, on August 22, 2002, she again became sick, this time fatally dying before reaching the hospital. The cause of death was believed to be a heart attack. The family declined a post-mortem, accepting it as a natural death. Jolly, now the senior woman in the house, took on more responsibility. She appeared efficient, cheerful, and well-connected socially. She drove herself to work each morning and returned in the evening, though it would later be revealed that she never had the job she claimed then. In 2008, 6 years after Anama's death, Tom Thomas died unexpectedly. Once again, the cause was labeled a heart attack, and no autopsy was performed. Over time, the joint family split, and members began living independently. 3 years later, tragedy struck again. On September 9, 2011, Roy Thomas, Jolly's husband, was found dead in the bathroom. Given the prior deaths, the family grew suspicious and requested a post-mortem. This time, toxicology results confirmed the presence of cyanide in Roy's system. It was revealed that Roy had been facing financial difficulties. Jolly claimed that he had become depressed, but investigators were no longer convinced. With the poison discovery, the earlier deaths were re-examined, and suspicion began to mount around Jolly. The initial investigation into Roy Thomas's death pointed toward suicide. Financial difficulties and ongoing marital tensions were cited as key stressors, and with no further evidence, the case was closed. But the tragic pattern was only beginning. On February 24, 2014, another member of the family died suddenly. This time, it was Matthew Mangali, the brother of Anama Thomas and uncle of Roy. His death, like Roy's, raised no alarm. There was no post-mortem. Authorities brushed it off as coincidence, but within the family, unease began to grow. One unexplained death could be fate, 2 might be misfortune, but more were coming. The 4th death was that of a toddler just 2 years old, Alphine Seyu, the daughter of Shayu Thomas and niece of Roy Thomas, died under equally mysterious circumstances. Her sudden passing deepened the family's fears, and yet, there were still no answers. 2 years later, on January 11, 2016, Alphine's mother, Shayu Thomas's wife, Silly Soya, also died under suspicious circumstances. That made 6 unexplained deaths in a single family, spread over 14 years, and still, authorities saw no crime, No connections, only loss after Silly's death. 2 more extended family members died in a road accident, adding fuel to whispers of something far more sinister than coincidence. Some in the community even began to speak of a family curse, but one person refused to accept supernatural explanations. Rojo Thomas, Roy's brother and Anama's son. Living in the United States at the time, Rojo returned home and took matters into his own hands. The pattern of deaths seemed deliberate, calculated. Rojo filed a formal complaint and demanded police reopen the investigation into the series of deaths, beginning with that of his own brother, Roy Thomas. Initially, authorities were slow to act, but Rojo pressed forward, conducting his own inquiry. His findings were startling. Rojo learned that Jolly Joseph Roy Thomas's widow had claimed for years to be a commerce lecturer at the prestigious NIT Calicut. But when Rojo contacted the university, he discovered the shocking truth. There was no record of any employee by that name. The identity card Jolly had used to convince her family and community was a forgery. Even more disturbing, Jolly had been present for every single death in the family. The coincidences were no longer plausible. Rojo's findings triggered a major police reinvestigation. The case was officially registered, and suspicion now focused squarely on Jolly Joseph. Authorities exhumed the bodies of all 6 deceased family members from the cemeteries at St. Lord's Church in Kudathai and St. Mary's Church in Kanamkulam for fresh forensic analysis. The Kerala police even enlisted forensic experts from other countries, signaling the gravity of the case. Jolly was brought in for questioning. At first, she denied any involvement, but as investigators dug deeper and began connecting the dots, the pressure mounted. Eventually, Jolly cracked and confessed. She had been systematically poisoning her family members for 14 years. According to her confession, each murder had a specific motive. Her first target was her mother-in-law, Thomas. Back in 2002, Jolly was frustrated that Anama controlled the family's finances. After an initial failed attempt, she succeeded in poisoning Anama by lacing her mutton soup with cyanide while the rest of the family was distracted. Next came her father-in-law, Tom Thomas. Around 2008, Roy and Jolly were under financial strain. When Jolly approached Tom for help, he sold off 2 acres of land and gave the entire proceeds to the couple but made it clear they would receive no further share of the family property. In retaliation, Jolly forged documents to claim a portion of the inheritance and then poisoned Tom's food, eliminating him as well. Suspicious of his father's death, Roy began asking questions, but before he could uncover the truth, Jolly turned on him. Roy, already burdened with debt and alcoholism, was easy to discredit. After poisoning his food, Jolly fabricated a narrative of suicide, even planting a fake suicide note with his body. When Roy's uncle Matthew Mangley questioned the cause of death and insisted on a post-mortem, which revealed traces of poison, shifted blame and convinced the police that Roy had taken his own life voluntarily. Soon after, Matthew himself died again by poisoning. Jolly had silenced another threat. Her next victim was 2-year-old Elphine. By this time, Jolly had developed a romantic interest in Shayu Thomas Roy's cousin, but he was married and had a daughter. In 2014, Jolly murdered Elphine, Shaju's child, eliminating what she saw as an obstacle. 2 years later, she did the same to Silly, Shaju's wife. After Silly's death, Jolly married Shaju and moved in with him, achieving what appeared to be her ultimate goal. Police briefly detained Shaju Thomas during the investigation, but no evidence emerged linking him to the crimes. When asked about her years-long deception involving the fake job at NIT Calicut, Jolly confessed that she had never worked there. Each day, she would leave home at the scheduled time, but instead of going to work, she would spend her hours at a nearby church or in the campus canteen living a double life. Hidden in plain sight, the full scale of Jolly Joseph's manipulation, fraud, and calculated murders shocked the nation. a woman once seen as a devout wife, mother, and professional had, over more than a decade, eliminated 6 family members one by one for control, money, and desire. The investigation into Jolly Joseph's case revealed something deeply unsettling. Everyone who had ever known or interacted with Jolly described her as warm, cheerful, and kind. She was the type of person who could always be found smiling, laughing, and engaging positively with those around her. Neighbors consistently praised her manners and demeanor. No one had ever heard her raise her voice or lose her temper. So, when the shocking truth came out, it was almost too much to believe. On October 5, 2019, 47-year-old Jolly Joseph was arrested, accused of methodically poisoning and killing 6 members of her own family, including her husband and father-in-law. The quiet, family-oriented woman with an unblemished reputation was now being labeled a cold-blooded serial killer. The investigation revealed that Jolly did not act alone in obtaining the poison. A man named Matthew, a relative of hers, had helped facilitate her deadly plan. Matthew's friend, Praji Kumar, who worked at a jewelry shop, provided the cyanide used in the murders. The chemical, commonly used to clean gold and silver ornaments, was traced back to the crime scene during a police search. Cyanide residue was discovered in Jolly's car and handbag, combined with her detailed confession and corroborating forensic evidence. The police compiled an 800-page charge sheet, officially filed on January 1, 2020. Jolly faced formal charges for 6 counts of murder, although she was granted bail by the Kerala High Court in 2021. The Kerala government immediately challenged the decision in the Supreme Court. The apex court later overturned her bail, and Jolly remains in custody as the legal battle continues. Shortly after these revelations, Jolly's second husband, Shayu, filed for divorce, further highlighting the personal collapse surrounding the case. In February 2023, the case took another twist. Kerala police exhumed the bodies of the victims and sent them for forensic testing to the Central Forensic Science Laboratory, CFSL, in Hyderabad. Surprisingly, the initial results showed no traces of cyanide in 4 of the 6 bodies. Testing for the remaining 2 was still underway at the time of the report. Despite this development, police maintained that the lack of cyanide traces did not undermine the case. Due to the time elapsed since the murders, some dating back years, forensic experts believed it was unlikely that cyanide would still be detectable in the remains. Authorities emphasized that Jolly's confession, along with a mountain of circumstantial and physical evidence, would be enough to prove her guilt in court. In hindsight, many believe this tragedy could have been prevented had authorities investigated the suspicious death of Jolly's mother-in-law, her first alleged victim, with more scrutiny. Subsequent murders might have been stopped. Coming up next, we take you from the green hills of Kerala to the suburban calm of Southern California, where the tragic case of Michelle Missy Avila shocked an entire community and revealed a chilling betrayal at the hands of her closest friends. Missy Avila was a bright, kind-hearted girl, beloved by family and admired by classmates. Born on February 8, 1968, in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, she was raised alongside 3 brothers and attended San Fernando High School with her 2 childhood best friends, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. Missy and Karen had been inseparable since the age of 8, but by the time they entered high school, cracks began to form in their friendship. Missy's natural beauty and charm made her popular, especially among the boys, and that popularity soon bred envy. Rumors began to spread during her sophomore year, ugly whispers claiming Missy had been romantically involved with several boys who already had girlfriends. One of these rumors sparked a brutal incident outside school, where a group of girls assaulted Missy in broad daylight. Her parents pressed charges against the ringleader, Sonia Balderas, and Missy was scheduled to testify against her in court on October 8, 1985, but she would never get that chance. Just weeks before her scheduled court appearance, Missy had a falling out with Karen and Laura, again fueled by a resurgence of rumors that she was interfering in their relationships. Missy had recently dated a boy named Randy, but ended it quickly due to his excessive partying. Karen then began dating Randy herself, and when she saw him flirting with Missy, old resentments boiled over. Missy, trying to be honest, told Karen that Randy wasn't a good match, and suggested she should find someone better. Instead of taking the advice as a gesture of friendship, Karen became enraged. Along with Laura, she resumed spreading damaging rumors. Tensions reached a breaking point when the two cornered Missy at a local park. Eyewitnesses later reported seeing Karen yell at her, slap her, shove her to the ground, and threaten her with a broken beer bottle before storming off. That confrontation happened just 10 days before Missy's death. Following the altercation, Laura expressed remorse and reconnected with Missy. They agreed to put the past behind them and salvage their friendship. Karen, however, remained distant until October 1st. On that day, she called Missy out of the blue to offer a heartfelt apology. The gesture meant a lot to Missy, who had begun missing her childhood friends. The trio made plans to hang out at Stonehurst Park later that evening. Missy's mother allowed her to go, but instructed her to be back home by 6 p.m. that afternoon. Laura picked Missy up in her car. The two drove around casually before heading to Stonehurst Park to meet Karen. Moments later, Karen arrived, but she wasn't alone. Another friend, Eva, sat in the passenger seat beside her. As Karen pulled into the parking lot, she parked her car unusually close to Laura. Single quotes as ... and from that moment, everything spiraled out of control. Missy, Eva, Laura, and Karen were once close friends, but on one particular afternoon, tensions escalated dramatically. As Missy and Eva sat in the car, they witnessed Laura and Karen roll down their windows and begin yelling at each other furiously. Shocked and confused, the girls looked on as their friends hurled insults back and forth. Missy had no idea what had triggered the fight. Suddenly, Karen slammed her car into reverse and sped out of the parking lot. Laura immediately followed. For 45 minutes, both girls drove recklessly out of the city and into the mountainous areas north of town. Fueled by rage, they ignored Missy and Ava's repeated pleas to stop and calm down. Eventually, the cars pulled into a secluded parking lot near a vast forest. Karen and Laura exited their vehicles and resumed their confrontation on foot. Concerned for their safety, Missy stepped out of the car in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. But to her horror, both girls abruptly stopped fighting, turned toward her, and advanced menacingly. Trapped between them and the vehicle, Missy was unable to retreat. Then, Karen laughed and the horrifying truth was revealed. The argument had been staged. Laura and Karen explained they were never angry at each other. The real target was Missy. They accused her of sleeping with their boyfriends, and said the entire situation had been orchestrated to lure her into the woods and teach her a lesson. Despite Missy's emotional pleas and denials, the girls ignored her. Physically smaller and far more vulnerable Missy stood just 4 feet 10 inches and weighed 95 pounds. Compared to Karen's 5 feet 2 inches and over 200 pounds, and Laura's 5 feet 6 inches and 135 pounds, she was easily overpowered. The girls began pushing her toward a trail that led deep into the forest. Eva, still near the car, eventually followed them. She later said she had no idea why she was even brought along and did not participate in what unfolded next. Once the group was far enough into the forest and out of sight, Laura suddenly turned and punched Missy in the face. Karen joined in. The two viciously beat Missy, punching, kicking, and stomping her until she collapsed on the ground. Afterward, Laura pulled out a knife and began hacking away at Missy's long hair, aware of how much she treasured it. Karen, lacking a knife, simply yanked out handfuls with her bare hands. Eva stood off to the side, watching in stunned silence. The violence continued. The girls bound Missy's arms behind her back and gagged her. Near a stream just 10 feet away, Laura entered the water and taunted Missy, calling for her to join. When Missy didn't respond, Karen stood her up and shoved her down the slope, where she landed near the water's edge. With her hands tied, she had no way to break her fall. Laura and Karen dragged her into the shallow stream, just 8 inches deep. Terrified, Eva ran back to the cars for help, only to discover they were locked and isolated. She lingered near the vehicles until a piercing scream echoed from the forest. Panicked, she curled up on the ground and waited for nearly an hour. Eventually, Laura and Karen re-emerged, drenched, laughing, and triumphant, but Missy was no longer with them, according to Ava's later testimony. The scream had come when Missy briefly managed to get her head above water before Karen forced it back under. When the girls realized she was dying, they finished the act by lifting a 4-foot log and smashing it down on her head. After the murder, the girls returned home with Eva. Hours later, Laura called Missy's mother, Irene, and fabricated a story. She had dropped Missy off with 3 boys in a blue Camaro after getting gas. She claimed to return later, only to find that Missy and the boys were gone. On October 4, 1985, Missy's body was discovered face down in a shallow stream in Big Tujunga Canyon, Angeles National Forest. A group of hikers made the heartbreaking find. Her arms were bound, her hair had been cut off, and a log had been placed atop her body. Nearby, police found beer cans, cigarettes, and a pair of men's overall situms that supported the fabricated story about the blue Camaro and mail. Strangers thought the deception worked. Detectives spent years pursuing false leads based on Laura and Karen's claim. Neither girl was suspected, largely because they attended Missy's funeral, offered support to the grieving family, and continued to feign innocence. Laura even mailed Missy's mother a sympathy card with $20 enclosed. Karen went further. She moved into the family's home, portraying herself as a supportive friend while secretly monitoring the investigation. She became obsessed with the case, covering her room with photos of Missy and newspaper clippings, regularly visiting the crime scene, and even claiming to have seen Missy's ghost. It wasn't until nearly 3 years later, on July 26, 1988, that the truth came out. Eva Caramello, who had witnessed everything, finally went to police. She revealed the entire sequence of events: the false argument, the accusations, the beating, the drowning, and her own terror. Eva admitted she had remained silent out of fear for her own life, as the girls had threatened to kill her if she ever told. In March 1990, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle were arrested and convicted of second-degree murder. The jury did not believe the crime was premeditated, and they rejected the first-degree charge. Both were sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Karen was released on December 9, 2011, after serving 21.5 years. Laura followed in December 2012, after serving 22 years. Later, Karen Severson sparked public outrage when she attempted to profit from the crime by releasing a memoir about the murder she helped commit. Missy's killer attempted to profit from her crime by writing a memoir about the murder and her time in prison. However, the book performed poorly. She also secured a movie deal, but in 2015, the victim's family sued to claim the profits. This legal battle led to the passage of Missy's Law in California legislation, requiring any entity helping to publish works created by criminals to notify the victims' families beforehand. Missy's case sparked important discussions on bullying, the complexities of teenage relationships, and the need for a culture grounded in empathy and kindness. In the wake of her death, various community initiatives and support networks emerged to offer guidance and protection for those facing similar struggles. As we remember Missy, we honor her memory by striving to create a world where friendships are built on trust and compassion. Her legacy is one of resilience and hope, a powerful reminder that every individual deserves to live free from harm. May her memory continue to inspire us to stand against bullying, support the betrayed, and build a future rooted in understanding now. Let's turn to another haunting case. The story of Lucy Landry. Lucy Davies, later known as Lucy Landry, was born in 1971 in Rutntha, a county in Wales. She was the eldest daughter of Roger and Andrea Davies and had a younger sister, Anna. The family lived in a close-knit, working-class community, surrounded by stunning mountain scenery. Lucy's childhood was described as happy and carefree. She and Anna were inseparable, bonding over shared interests, especially a love of ponies. Her infectious joy and bright personality made Lucy a standout student in primary school. Teachers and peers were drawn to her charm, and by the time she reached her teens, she had become one of the most admired and popular girls in school. Lucy and Anna joined a local riding club, where their talent quickly stood out. They went on to compete in numerous equestrian events, gaining both discipline and recognition by the time she entered secondary school. Lucy had become an accomplished writer and a talented musician. She studied both piano and flute, dedicating hours to perfecting her skills. Her dedication earned her a spot in her school's choir and a local youth orchestra, where she deepened her appreciation for classical music. Around this time, she quietly developed feelings for a classmate named Gareth Jenkins, though she kept her crush to herself. After completing school in 1989, Lucy enrolled at the University of Warwick to pursue a degree in music education, hoping to become a teacher. But once in the program, she realized the academic path didn't match her expectations. Though her love for music remained, Lucy decided to change her focus and switched to urban planning. It was during her university years that Lucy met Graham Grummett. They connected instantly, sharing a sense of humor, a love of art, and similar values. Their relationship blossomed naturally. When Lucy introduced Gra to her parents, Roger and Andrea approved wholeheartedly. They were so confident in the relationship that they gifted Lucy a house in Coventry to help the couple begin a life together. Not long after, Gra moved in. In 1995, they welcomed their first child, a son named James. Lucy paused her studies to care for him, while Gra juggled coursework and a night shift job at the city's postal sorting office. Over time, the long hours and isolation at home began to weigh on Lucy. The constant caregiving and lack of adult interaction left her feeling lonely and unfulfilled. In search of connection and distraction, Lucy began visiting online chat rooms. One night, she struck up a lively conversation with Harold Landry, a 53-year-old American businessman from Louisiana. Harold had grown up in poverty as one of many siblings. Determined to escape his circumstances, he built a career through grit and ingenuity. He realized the key to wealth in the oil industry wasn't owning wells, but providing vital infrastructure for those who did. His company, specializing in hydraulic equipment for major oil firms, made him a multi-millionaire. By the 1990s, Harold was living a life of luxury, splitting his time between Texas and a beachfront property in Cozumel, Mexico. Twice divorced, Harold had children from previous relationships, though the number and identities remained unclear. One thing was certain: he ensured they wanted for nothing. In 1992, Harold began dating a woman 20 years his junior, despite the fact that she was married. Undeterred by her marital status, he charmed her into an affair. On February 6, 1994, he took her on a romantic outing in New Orleans, hiring a babysitter to watch her children. After their evening, Harold dropped her off and offered to drive the babysitter home, but her husband, Chris Price, had been watching. As Harold said goodbye outside the house, Chris followed him in his car. Sensing the danger, Harold opened his glove box and retrieved the revolver he always carried. At a red light, tensions escalated. According to the babysitter, the sole witness, Harold brandished the gun and fired. The bullet tore through Chris's neck, severing an artery and damaging a vocal nerve. Chris collapsed on the pavement, bleeding profusely. Thankfully, there was a hospital nearby. Emergency surgery saved his life. Harold Landry was arrested and charged with attempted murder. Harold's trial for attempted murder began in 1997. In his opening statement, the defense attorney argued that Harold's actions were rooted in a complicated and sordid affair involving Chris, claiming he had acted out of fear and in self-defense. This strategy proved somewhat effective. The jury, made up of 4 men and 8 women, convicted Harold of the lesser charge of aggravated assault. He received a 5-year prison sentence. However, after an appeal, Harold was granted probation in exchange for a $500 fine and community service. Although Harold had hoped for full exoneration, he expressed gratitude toward his attorney, Pat, whose efforts he credited for the outcome. The 2 men formed a close friendship in the years that followed. After reaching a confidential agreement with Chris, Harold moved to Covington, where he began living a life of comfort and luxury, financially secure and seemingly free of worry. When chatting with a woman named Lucy online, Harold was surprisingly candid about his past, sharing stories of his previous jobs, romantic entanglements, and legal troubles. Rather than being deterred by his honesty, Lucy found herself drawn to him even more. Their connection deepened into a full-fledged online romance, with Harold promising her a glamorous and comfortable life. Eventually, his persistence and charm convinced Lucy to end her relationship with her then-partner, Gareth, clearing the way for Harold to pursue her without competition. In the early 2000s, Harold traveled to England to meet Lucy in person. During the visit, Lucy introduced him to her parents, Roger and Andrea, as her new boyfriend. Though surprised by the significant age gap, her parents respected her choices and offered no objections. Harold, meanwhile, felt fortunate. He lavished Lucy with gifts and attention. Deeply in love and already envisioning a future together, he began planning a proposal, but he wanted the moment to be perfect. To set the stage, Harold arranged a trip to Mexico, bringing along Lucy, her young son James, and even Gareth, with whom they were still amicable at the time. Mexico had long been Harold's favorite destination, and his close friend Pat, the lawyer from his trial, also had a nearby apartment. The trip had all the elements Harold needed to feel at ease. While in Mexico, Harold bought a diamond ring and excitedly shared the news with Pat. However, Pat harbored reservations. He had begun to suspect that Lucy was spending too much time with Gareth. Still, Harold remained oblivious. Undeterred, he went through with the proposal, and Lucy accepted. In mid-2003, the couple celebrated their union. Shortly afterward, Harold surprised Lucy by purchasing a $1 million home in an exclusive neighborhood in Worcester. Nestled in this quiet rural area, their marriage appeared to thrive. They quickly became close friends with neighbors Rachel, Clark, and Stephen Kennedy. Not long after settling in, Lucy gave birth to their daughter, Harriet. Harold embraced fatherhood with enthusiasm, showering Harriet with love and treating James like his own son. But as time went on, cracks began to form. Lucy's workload increased, and her stress mounted. At the same time, Harold's expectations grew more rigid. He demanded her obedience and complete alignment with his preferences. Lucy, strong-willed and outspoken, refused to compromise. Their volatile personalities clashed often, turning minor disagreements into full-blown fights. Though reconciliations followed, their arguments became routine, loud, intense, and emotionally draining. To Rachel and Stephen next door, the sounds of shouting became a frequent background noise. They knew both Harold and Lucy struggled with alcohol, which only exacerbated the tension. Their fights were chaotic, sometimes lasting for days. Eventually, Lucy reconnected with Gareth, an old friend from secondary school. The two spent increasing amounts of time together. One night, after Harold had fallen asleep, he noticed Lucy spending hours on her computer. It occurred to him that she might be searching for an escape, just as she had once found him online. In The autumn of 2009, Lucy invited Gareth to stay with her. Meanwhile, Harold returned to England, hoping to mend the relationship. But as soon as he arrived, Lucy asked for a divorce. Harold was devastated at first, but within weeks, he began dating another woman he met online. As both parties moved forward with new relationships, their divorce negotiations became increasingly bitter. The main source of contention was the family home. Lucy insisted on retaining the house to maintain stability for the children. Harold, however, refused. Instead, he offered her a financial settlement to purchase a modest apartment. He also made the decision to remove her from his will entirely. When Lucy discovered this, she was furious. Overwhelmed with anger, she told her son James everything about Harold's past, leaving out no detail. Amid the turmoil, Gareth invited her to take a short trip to Wales to clear her head. But by this point, the damage was done. Both Harold and Lucy were drinking heavily. Their fights were escalating, growing more physical and dangerous. With their children caught in the middle of the toxic household, on the afternoon of February 1st, 2010, Harold drank several glasses of wine. Later, when Stephen returned from work, he noticed a package had been mistakenly delivered to Harold's address. When Stephen came by to collect it, Harold invited him in for a drink. Inside, a trivial argument broke out between Harold and Lucy, this time over a piece of furniture she wanted for their upcoming move. The disagreement spiraled into violence. In a fit of rage, Harold grabbed a kitchen utensil and struck Lucy in the face. James rushed to the scene to find his mother injured and bleeding. He immediately called the police and helped his younger sister find safety. Lucy, realizing she needed help, left the house with the children. Her instinct was to seek refuge at Stephen's home nearby. But before she could reach it, Harold caught up with her. Armed with a knife, he attacked, stabbing her multiple times before leaving her bleeding under a bush in the garden. Stephen, alerted by Lucy's screams, ran outside. At first, he thought she had collapsed, but then he saw the blood. He quickly called emergency services. Police arrived promptly, called for paramedics, and searched the area. They found the terrified children hiding in the backyard, but Harold was gone. Paramedics did everything they could to stabilize Lucy and rushed her to the hospital. Tragically, her heart stopped shortly after arrival. Meanwhile, Harold turned up at Rachel's house. He told her something terrible had happened, but offered no further details. He handed her 3 bank drafts, totaling $4 million, some cash, the keys to his car, and several signed blank checks. Then, he left for home. By that time, multiple police units were actively searching for him. Officers eventually spotted him walking along the road and took him into custody. Roger and Andrea were devastated by the news. In a statement issued through the police, they pleaded for privacy during this incredibly painful time following the loss of their daughter. From that point forward, their primary focus became caring for their grandchildren. The forensic report confirmed that Lucy had died from multiple stab wounds to the chest. With this evidence, along with James' eyewitness account, Harold was charged with murder on February 5, 2010. The trial took place in early February 2011, overseen by Judge David Fawson. Unlike earlier proceedings, Harold was not defended by Pat. Instead, attorney Andy Childs took over his defense. It was a difficult case, but Childs argued that Harold had been provoked by Lucy's intense rage, leaving him with no other option. During his testimony, Harold broke down in tears, expressing his love for Lucy and deep regret over his actions. As part of his defense strategy, he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, claiming Lucy had pushed him to his emotional breaking point. To highlight the brutality of the crime, the prosecution presented a graphic animation recreating Lucy's injuries, shocking the courtroom. On February 24, 2011, after fewer than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Harold Landry had murdered his 38-year-old wife. The following day, the judge delivered Harold's sentence. He condemned Harold's actions as indescribable and unforgivable, rejecting the defense's argument that Lucy provoked the attack. Harold received a life sentence with a minimum of 16 years before parole eligibility. He would be over 80 before any possibility of release. Lucy's family expressed gratitude for the verdict and the judge's remarks, saying they echoed their own feelings. While no sentence could ever bring Lucy back, the decision offered them some comfort in their grief. Harold, however, continued to insist he was innocent and planned to appeal. Now, on to the case of Sierra Lamar. Sierra Lamar was born on October 19, 1996. She had an older sister, Danielle, and together they were raised in a stable household. However, the family endured a major trauma during their early years. Sierra's father, Steve, was convicted of indecent behavior toward a child after an incident at a sleepover. He pled no contest and served a year in prison. This deeply affected the family and led to the end of Steve and Sierra's mother, Marlene's relationship. After the separation, Marlene began dating Rick Gardner. In October 2011, Marlene, Rick, and Sierra moved from Fremont to Morgan Hill, about 40 miles south, into a rural ranch-style home on Poughkeepsie Court. Rick worked in construction, and while his business was improving, money remained tight. Sierra was unhappy about the move. She had to leave behind friends, cheerleading, and familiarity. At her new school, Sobrato High, she wasn't welcomed warmly. Still, over time she adapted, made friends, rejoined cheer, and began performing well in school again. On March 11, 2012, Sierra called her father and sister from Fremont with updates about school and weekend plans. She wanted to dye her hair, talked about homework, and seemed optimistic. She ended the call with promises to speak again soon. No one knew it would be their last conversation with her. The next morning, March 16, 2012, started like any other. At around 6 a.m., Marlene and Rick left for work. Sierra, getting ready for school, sent a tweet to a friend at 6:29 a.m. She had to walk a deserted stretch of road between Palm and Doherty Avenues to reach the school bus stop. At 7:11 a.m., she texted a friend to meet up before class, but when the bus arrived, Sierra wasn't there. Her friend assumed she had skipped school, which wasn't entirely out of character, so no immediate alarm was raised. However, when Marlene tried to reach Sierra later that day, her phone went straight to voicemail. Still, she wasn't panicked until she came home and found Sierra's room. Untouched calls to Sierra's dad and friends revealed no one had seen or heard from her. When Marlene contacted Sobrato High, she learned Sierra had missed every class. Panic set in. Sierra's friends began to leave frantic messages, and her mother immediately notified the police. Police responded quickly but faced a challenge. There was no clear location where Sierra could have gone missing. They began questioning her close contacts. Although Sierra had adjusted well to her new environment, investigators couldn't ignore the emotional weight of the recent move and parental divorce. Some initially considered that she may have run away, especially since she had previously joked or expressed a desire to return to Fremont. But doubts about a voluntary disappearance grew. Sierra had completely vanished from all digital platforms. Her phone was off. Social media went silent, and there were no signs of travel or communication. These red flags prompted authorities to launch a large-scale search. 2 days later, on a Sunday morning, forensic analysts made a breakthrough. Sierra's phone had briefly pinged a cell tower overnight, just once, before going dead again. The signal led them to a field near the Lamar residence. Search teams combed the area and discovered Sierra's Samsung Galaxy phone near the roadside. It was heavily damaged, suggesting it had been tossed from a moving car. Investigators later determined that no one had turned on the phone. It had momentarily powered on due to moisture from rain causing a short circuit, triggering a false ping. This accidental ping caused by a single raindrop, became the pivotal moment that helped investigators locate one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. Sierra's phone appeared to have been tossed from a moving vehicle. There were no footprints, tire tracks, or any physical evidence at the scene. The next day, about 2 kilometers from her home, searchers made a chilling discovery. Sierra's backpack was found abandoned near a barn. Inside were her school assignments, inhaler, and money, all essential items she would never have willingly left behind. Adding to the growing concern, investigators located a full set of clothes inside her luggage, believed to be the same outfit Sierra was wearing the morning she vanished. It included a pullover, pants, socks, shoes, and undergarments. These items were immediately sent for forensic testing, and the results were telling. Male DNA was discovered on her pants, strongly suggesting that Sierra had been assaulted. Following this discovery, the investigation escalated dramatically. Her case drew widespread attention, generating over 1,000 new leads and more than 7,000 manners of investigation. A massive search was launched involving over 800 volunteers and professionals, meticulously combing through lakes, reservoirs, fields, and abandoned buildings. Posters of Sierra blanketed the region, and her parents offered a $10,000 reward for information. Yet, despite the intense search, only a golf ball and a flip-flop were found. 12 days after Sierra's disappearance, investigators caught a break. DNA found on her pants was matched to a local man, Antolin Garcia, a 21-year-old who lived just 7 miles away in the Morgan Hill area. Authorities had compared the sample to all 57 registered sex offenders in the area, notably Sierra's own father, who was a registered offender, voluntarily disclosed his past to police and was quickly cleared, allowing investigators to focus elsewhere. Garcia Torres, who lived at the Maple Leaf RV park with his mother, pregnant wife, and young daughter, became the prime suspect. His background was troubling, marked by a childhood of abuse and neglect. His father had been imprisoned for molesting a relative and had once threatened to kill both Antolin and his mother. In 2009, Antolin was accused of statutory rape, but the charges were dropped. However, his DNA was collected and entered into the system. The very sample that now linked him to Sierra police began a quiet but thorough surveillance operation. They tapped Garcia Torres' phone, installed a GPS tracker on his car, and even placed undercover officers in a nearby RV, reviewing security footage from the morning of Sierra's disappearance. They saw him leave the RV park in his red Volkswagen Jetta at around 7 a.m., matching the window of time Sierra vanished. Though Garcia Torres claimed he was heading to work, records showed he never showed up. Digging deeper, investigators learned that 3 attempted kidnappings had occurred in the parking lot of the same Safeway where Garcia Torres worked, all within the prior 3 years. The suspect had never been caught, but a taser was recovered at one of the scenes, and it contained a partial fingerprint. When compared to Garcia Torres' prints, it was a match. That, combined with the DNA on Sierra's clothing, gave investigators enough evidence to detain him and seize his vehicle for forensic analysis. During questioning, Garcia Torres was cocky and evasive. He denied knowing Sierra and claimed he had been fishing the day she disappeared, but his alibi didn't hold up. He even admitted to bizarre behaviors, like strangling snakes while driving and throwing tissues out of the car window, one of which, he claimed, landed in the same location where Sierra's backpack was discovered, given the astronomical odds of that coincidence. His story rang hollow. On May 21, 2012, Antolin Garcia Torres was arrested outside his workplace in the Safeway parking lot, formally charged in connection with Sierra's disappearance. Evidence began piling up. Sierra's DNA was found on the inside handle of Garcia Torres' car's rear door. Fibers from her clothing matched those on his car seats. A strand of Sierra's hair was discovered on a piece of rope found in his trunk. The conclusion was clear. Sierra had been inside his vehicle. But there was still one glaring problem. Sierra's body had not been found, and without it, prosecutors faced a challenge. Could they pursue a murder charge with no confirmed death? Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen announced on May 19, 2014, that he would seek the death penalty, although Garcia Torres pleaded not guilty. The forensic evidence left little room for doubt. After years of delays, his trial finally began on January 30, 2017. Sometimes, facing the harsh truth is less painful than the torment of the unknown. That's what Maria Leon came to believe. Her daughter had vanished without a trace, and as days turned to weeks, hope began to fade. At some point, she found herself praying not for a miracle, but for closure, even if it meant her daughter was no longer alive. She just wanted to lay her to rest. Yet, no one could have anticipated the horror of what came next. When examining the tragic case of Melanie Stacy Amaya, we must also ask, were there adult oversights? And, more painfully, could her death have been prevented? Born on February 21, 2002, in the small town of San Rafael in northern Colombia, Melanie was the first daughter of Maria Leon and William Amaya. 2 years later, the family welcomed another daughter, Natalie. From a young age, the sisters were inseparable, sharing secrets, laughter, and a strong emotional bond with their mother. Melanie stood out early in life for her artistic flair. She had a remarkable talent for drawing and an innate passion for cosmetics. She often painted the faces of her dolls, her sister, her mother, even her friends, confidently declaring that one day she'd become a makeup artist or stylist. Her academic performance matched her creative skills. Teachers described her as intelligent, driven, and sociable. Naturally charismatic, Melanie had no trouble making friends, both in and outside of school. Her polished appearance and early mastery of makeup also drew plenty of attention. But things began to shift when Melanie turned 14. Her parents filed for divorce, although the separation was amicable, with William remaining actively involved in his daughters' lives. The change still marked a pivotal point. About 6 months later, Maria began dating a man named Ruben Morales. The two soon married and relocated the family to Medellin, where Ruben had stable employment and better opportunities awaited the girls. Ruben quickly formed a close bond with his stepdaughters, treating them as his own, supporting their education, hobbies, and aspirations. In high school, Melanie's personality started to evolve. She became more rebellious, increasingly drawn to music, and even considered quitting school to pursue a career as a DJ. For her birthday, she asked for a mixing console. She also began getting large, bold tattoos on her arms, chest, back, and legs, a clear sign of her desire for self-expression. Though concerned, her parents didn't interfere with her personal choices. However, what truly alarmed them was discovering that Melanie had experimented with illegal substances. Behind the artistic flair and the strong personality was a teenager, walking a fragile path, one that would eventually lead to tragedy. In 2016, on her 14th birthday, Melanie organized a party and wanted to hire a DJ, but lacked the money for a professional. Through acquaintances, she found 16-year-old Miguel Angel Pera, an aspiring DJ with undeniable charm and musical talent. She contacted him, and he agreed to perform. The two clicked immediately. After the party, they continued to see each other frequently, strolling through parks and city streets, openly affectionate and inseparable. Melanie introduced Miguel as her boyfriend, and her family quickly grew accustomed to his presence. Despite coming from humble, even impoverished circumstances, Miguel made a good impression. He was respectful, courteous, and well to Melanie's parents. He didn't seem like a threat. Eventually, Miguel confided in them that he had been expelled from his home after a violent conflict with his mother, who disapproved of his musical ambitions. Wanting to help, Maria offered him temporary shelter, but in doing so, she unknowingly welcomed instability into her home. Melanie and Miguel soon began living together. For the first 6 months, their relationship seemed happy, but gradually, troubling signs emerged. Melanie's school performance declined, her appearance grew more provocative, and her rebellious behavior intensified. Tensions between the couple increased, and arguments became common, sometimes erupting inside the family home. Maria's concerns deepened when she discovered that Miguel was supplying Melanie with drugs. She confronted her daughter, who tearfully admitted to trying substances, but promised it would stop. Maria and Ruben decided it was best for Miguel to leave, but Melanie, protective of him, begged them to let him stay, promising things would improve. Against their better judgment, they relented. It was a decision they would come to regret soon. Bruises began appearing on Melanie's body, injuries she dismissed as results of sports or clumsiness. But the truth couldn't be hidden for long. 6 months later, a violent argument turned physical. Miguel assaulted Melanie so severely, she required medical attention. Maria wanted to press charges, but Melanie pleaded with her not to, saying she would deny everything. She refused to accuse her partner. Melanie's parents made a firm attempt to end the relationship and prevent the couple from cohabitating, but their daughter pushed back, threatening to run away if they tried to separate them, and so the cycle continued. A toxic, damaging relationship allowed to persist because Melanie's love and loyalty blinded her to the danger. This volatile dynamic stretched over 2 more years. By early May 2018, Melanie finally found the strength to break free. After another intense argument escalated into violence, she told Miguel it was over. She demanded he leave the house immediately, warning him that if he didn't, she would go to the police. Miguel complied, at least at first, but he couldn't let go. Consumed by jealousy and emotional instability, he began stalking Melanie. He tracked her movements, monitored her social interactions, and made obsessive phone calls. What happened next would send shockwaves through her family and community, a tragic culmination of all the red flags that went unheeded, all the boundaries that were crossed, and all the warnings that were ignored. Miguel's obsession didn't end with the breakup. He began bombarding Melanie with messages, a disturbing mix of love declarations, apologies, and thinly veiled death threats. Alarmed by his behavior, Ruben sought a restraining order to protect his stepdaughter, but authorities dismissed his concerns, brushing them off as nothing more than teenage drama. Maria too took action. She reached out to the prosecutor's office, expressing deep concern over Miguel's potential for violence. But again, her warnings were not taken seriously. Officials wrongly assumed that an 18-year-old boy posed no real threat to his former girlfriend, a dangerous misjudgment, rooted in ignorance of Miguel's true nature. Nearly 2 months passed since the breakup. Miguel seemed to have calmed down, and no longer attempted to contact Melanie or show up uninvited. Melanie began to regain a sense of normalcy. Her grades improved, her social life flourished, and she once again embraced her love of music. Her parents, too, began to breathe easier, believing that chapter was finally closed. Then came the night of June 28, 2018. Melanie was thrilled to attend a close friend's birthday party at one of Madeleine's most popular nightclubs. She spent hours preparing, selecting an outfit, applying makeup, and carefully styling her hair. When she was satisfied with her look, she kissed her mother goodbye and assured her she wouldn't be out too late. A cab waited outside. Maria didn't worry. She trusted her daughter's friends and expected Melanie to return safely, but the next morning brought unease. Melanie hadn't come home at first. Maria tried to stay calm. Perhaps her daughter had slept over at a friend's place and her phone battery had simply died. But by midday, concern turned to fear. Maria called Melanie's friend Isaac, the one hosting the party, and was stunned by his response. Melanie had never arrived at the club. None of their mutual friends had seen or heard from her that night. Panic set in. Maria began calling every one of Melanie's contacts. Nobody had any information. It was as though Melanie had vanished. The moment she stepped into the taxi, Maria immediately contacted William, Melanie's father. He rushed over, and together with Ruben, they filed a missing persons report. But they were met with cold bureaucracy. Officers insisted that 24 hours had to pass before they could act, suggesting that Melanie was probably just sleeping off the night at a friend's house. But her parents knew better. Time was critical, and they weren't going to waste it. The family mobilized quickly. Maria, William, and Ruben began contacting everyone they could think of. They visited local hangouts, checked hospitals, and printed hundreds of missing person flyers. Friends and relatives joined the search, flooding the streets of Medellin with Melanie's photo, hoping someone, anyone, might recognize her or offer a clue. The family's nightmare had only just begun. Boredom soon crept into Sherry's life, prompting a cycle of online flirtations. As she explained it, each encounter was little more than a playful indulgence, a game in which every new admirer served as a rung on the ladder of her self-esteem. The attention gave her a sense of power, even invincibility. But this emotionally detached mindset would eventually lead her down a destructive path. Amid her frequent online activity, Sherry met Jerry Cassidy, a former police officer living in Reno, Nevada. Unlike her past online flings, Jerry seemed to genuinely care for her. Their connection grew rapidly, and the two even adopted playful aliases online. Sherry took on Jerry's fool, while he used Sherry's fool. Their digital relationship intensified, encompassing everything from flirty chats and nude photographs to explicit videos featuring Sherry herself. It's worth noting that this took place in 1999, a time when sharing such content required far more effort and technical know-how than it does today. Jerry Cassidy had been born on October 6, 1960, in Kansas City, Missouri. From an early age, he had a passion for hunting and harbored dreams of joining the FBI. He hoped to climb the ranks by starting in law enforcement, beginning his career with the Montana Police. He later served as a homicide detective for 9 years, eventually attaining the rank of lieutenant. But his promising career took a dark turn. While investigating a case, Jerry uncovered fraudulent documents that pointed to corruption within his own department. Doing the right thing, he reported his findings only to be labeled a snitch by his peers. The backlash was swift and ruthless, ostracized and demoted. Jerry ultimately resigned from the force in 1994. This fall from grace had a devastating effect on him. He spiraled into alcoholism and substance abuse, battling deep depression. His marriage collapsed soon after, and he lost visitation rights with his son, a blow that hit him hard. Trying to rebuild, Jerry found work as a security officer at Harrah's Hotel and Casino in Kansas City. By 1999, he had relocated to Reno for a similar position. It was during this period that he met Sherry online and quickly fell under her spell. What began as a romantic relationship soon turned manipulative. Sherry's influence over Jerry became obvious to those who knew him. He displayed intense emotional highs when speaking with her, and crushing lows during her absence, symptoms that some likened to bipolar disorder. Then came the lies. In September, Sherry claimed she was pregnant with Jerry's child. Not long after, she said she'd miscarried after her husband, Bruce, allegedly beat her. The truth, however, was starkly different. Bruce was a devoted family man, not the abusive monster Sherry portrayed. Jerry, unaware of her deception, was furious. The imagined loss of his unborn child and the idea that Sherry was a victim of domestic violence devastated him. Still, Sherry warned Jerry not to confront Bruce, saying he was powerful and well-connected. Any retaliation, she warned, would bring disastrous consequences. Barely a month later, Sherry told Jerry she was pregnant again, this time with twins, a crucial detail she omitted. In 1995, she had undergone a tubal ligation, rendering her permanently unable to conceive. The depth of her manipulation only deepened. On November 5, 1999, Jerry received a disturbing email that appeared to come from Bruce. It claimed that Sherry had gained weight due to her pregnancy and now wanted an abortion to slim down. Alarmed, Jerry reached out to Sherry. She responded briefly, saying she needed to go away for a few days. The next day, another email arrived, again seemingly from Bruce. It said Sherry had undergone the abortion and would soon return home, but could no longer bear children. Enclosed was a staged photo of Sherry covered in bruises. The message pushed Jerry over the edge. He and Sherry decided the only solution was to eliminate Bruce. They meticulously planned the murder mapping, the route, choosing a parking location, and selecting the best time and place to strike. That evening, Jerry set off for Michigan. Meanwhile, Bruce was wrapping up his day at work. Just as he was leaving, he received a call from Sherry. She asked if he could pick up a pizza on his way home, a distraction that was key to their plan. Engrossed in the call, Bruce didn't see Jerry approaching from behind. Jerry pulled out a .20 caliber firearm and shot Bruce dead. After the murder, Jerry returned to Nevada while Sherry began orchestrating the cover-up. She called Bruce's brother, Chuck, feigning concern about his failure to come home. Alarmed by her distress, Chuck and his wife rushed to the yard, where they found Bruce's body and called police in horror. At first, investigators suspected robbery. An old friend of Bruce's, John Hutchinson, became their primary suspect. He owed his employer over $5,000 and had previously had ties to Sherry. His alibi was weak, and he failed a polygraph test. But despite initial suspicion, there wasn't enough evidence to hold him. He was eventually released, and the case went cold. At the time, no one questioned Sherry's behavior after Bruce's death. She appeared appropriately distraught, but behind the scenes, she was anything but grief-stricken. She began attending parties frequently, cashed out Bruce's life insurance, sold the family business, and emptied joint accounts effectively, becoming wealthy overnight. She even invited Jerry to move into the house she had once shared with Bruce, but their relationship quickly soured. Shortly after Bruce's murder, Jerry learned that Sherry had already moved on. She was involved with another man. Consumed by guilt, Jerry began to unravel emotionally. The weight of the crime he'd committed, all in the name of love, now seemed unbearable. Having once dedicated his life to upholding the law, Jerry Cassidy was now living in the shadows of betrayal, manipulation, and murder. Jerry Cassidy eventually realized he was nothing more than a pawn in Sherry's scheme. She had manipulated his emotions and used him to eliminate her husband. As the truth unraveled, Jerry came to understand that Bruce was an innocent man. None of the abuse allegations Sherry had made were true. There were no beatings, no children, no dark affiliations. Even the so-called evidence photographs Sherry presented were outdated, dating back to 1994. 3 months later, on February 11th, Jerry Cassidy took his own life. He was found in the apartment he rented from his cousin, a .22 caliber rifle beside him. Among his possessions were letters addressed to his family and a note, along with a briefcase, intended for his attorney, John O'Connor. When John opened the briefcase, he discovered damning evidence that would ultimately seal Sherry's fate. Inside were records, messages, and a handwritten confession. In the note, Jerry admitted to killing Bruce and laid full responsibility on Sherry. He explained that she had manipulated him into committing the murder and expressed profound regret for his actions. Jerry acknowledged how deeply he had been deceived, how his mental health had spiraled, and how he could no longer live with the weight of what he had done. He wrote that the truth had finally surfaced, that Sherry had been motivated solely by money and the desire to rid herself of her husband. She had succeeded, regardless of the lives shattered in the process. Following this revelation, Authorities quickly arrested Sherry and charged her with second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Her trial began 10 months later on December 12th. Due to the crime's online origins and the bizarre circumstances, the case drew intense public interest. Sherry pleaded not guilty. Her defense team argued that Jerry had fabricated the evidence out of remorse and that he alone was responsible. They also attempted to shift blame onto another man, J.N. During trial, disturbing exchanges between Sherry and J.N. were presented, including messages where they discussed acquiring a firearm. The prosecution also revealed that just one day after Bruce's murder, Sherry changed her name, address, and legal identity, and repeated this behavior after Jerry's death. The evidence was overwhelming. After just 2 days of deliberation, the jury found Sherry Miller guilty of second-degree murder. On January 9, 2001, she was sentenced to life in prison. However, her defense later raised objections, particularly questioning the admissibility of Jerry's posthumous letter. These objections triggered a lengthy legal battle, and in 2008, a federal judge ordered a retrial. As a result, Sherry was released from prison in July 2009 pending further proceedings. For over 3 years, she remained free without restrictions. She had access to the internet, resumed dating online, and reconnected with her children, which seemed to have a positive emotional impact on her. But the decision sparked public outrage. Bruce and Jerry's families were devastated, believing that Sherry's release had resulted from a legal technicality rather than justice. Then, in August 2012, the district court reversed its decision. Sherry was rearrested and returned to prison, where she has remained ever since. While incarcerated, Sherry eventually admitted her guilt. In April 2016, she wrote a letter confessing to her role in Bruce's murder. She claimed that her original denial was based on legal advice. Her attorneys had warned that any confession would ruin her chances at retrial. However, her lawyers later denied this, saying that had they known the truth, they would have advised a plea deal. Had Sherry come clean earlier, she may have faced just 15 years in prison instead of a life sentence. By then, she had already spent 2 decades behind bars. Remarkably, during her imprisonment, Sherry married for the 4th time. Her new husband, Michael Denai, learned about her case through the media and reached out. They grew close, and he proposed during their very first meeting. Chapter 4. The unmasking and imprisonment of the robbery eventually. The police managed to track down the audacious bank robber. On June 20, 2008, 28-year-old Brett Ryan was arrested during a failed robbery attempt. The news shocked everyone who knew him, especially his family. Brett had once volunteered at a children's hospital and now stood accused of robbing 12 banks and walking away with over $28,000 in total loot. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. While incarcerated, mental health professionals evaluated Brett and found no signs of aggression, substance abuse, or any mental illness. He was cooperative, pleasant, and never caused trouble. Due to his exemplary conduct and nonviolent profile, Brett was granted parole after serving just 2 years. Prison staff described him as charismatic, hardworking, and remorseful, a young man who had simply made a poor decision while drowning in debt. Official reports noted he posed minimal risk of reoffending. Chapter 5. Brett's attempt to rebuild his life as part of his parole terms. Brett was required to attend psychotherapy and report any difficulties in his personal life, whether related to family, romantic relationships, or work, as these could act as potential triggers for relapse. Despite his determination to start over, Brett's reality was far more complicated. His debts didn't magically disappear, and his criminal record made finding employment nearly impossible. Even basic jobs, such as house painting, were out of reach for an ex-convict. In desperation, Brett filed for bankruptcy. His parents stepped in to support him financially, which allowed him to return to university, this time enrolling in the information technology department. He remained committed to therapy and tried his best to rebuild his life. It was during these therapy sessions that Brett was encouraged to be more open and honest with those around him. Chapter 6. Brett and Kristen's fate. In September 2011, a friend set Brett up on a blind date with Kristen Baxter, a charming physiotherapist who lived independently with her small dog and had a love for travel. The chemistry between them was instant. They bonded over shared interests like animals, outdoor adventures, and sports. Soon, they became inseparable. Brett even joined Kristen's family on a vacation to the Bahamas. Her dog quickly grew fond of him, and it seemed like Brett had finally left his troubled past behind. In January 2013, he moved into Kristen's apartment. Together, they started discussing marriage. Chapter 7. Hiding the truth from his fiancé. Brett, who had grown up in the quiet suburbs, was now living the city life, spending time with Kristen at trendy restaurants, enjoying late-night swims, and planning for their future. But while his brothers were advancing their careers, Brett was still financially dependent on his parents. When Brett's father unexpectedly passed away, he moved back in with his mother, Susan, to support her through the loss. During that time, he confessed his deep love for Kristen and his dream of proposing, but admitted he couldn't afford a proper ring. Touched by his sincerity, Susan gave him money to purchase a beautiful diamond engagement ring. Kristen joyfully accepted his proposal. The couple began planning an extravagant wedding, and Brett even took on small jobs to surprise her with gifts. But he was secretly overwhelmed with anxiety. He had no career, no income, and a criminal past he was hiding from the woman he planned to marry. He eventually dropped out of his IT program and focused entirely on finding employment, hoping to secure a future before his lies caught up with him. Chapter 8. A job offer that collapsed in early 2016. Brett finally got what seemed like a lucky break, a promising job offer in the IT field. Overjoyed, he shared the news with Kristen, and they celebrated with both families. But shortly afterward, the offer was rescinded when the employer discovered his criminal history. Crushed, Brett kept the setback to himself. Unwilling to disappoint Kristen, he pretended he was working remotely. Each day, while Kristen went to work, Brett staged a fake work routine at home, tapping away at his computer and managing the illusion. Convinced that they were now financially stable, Kristen eagerly planned a lavish September 16, 2016 wedding, booking a luxury venue and a ski resort for the bachelor party. The couple even began looking for a spacious new house, dreaming of starting their married life fresh. Susan, too, believed her son had finally turned his life around, that he'd graduated, landed a solid job, and was ready to stand on his own. Chapter 9. The web of lies begins to unravel in truth. Brett's world was built on deception, desperate for cash. He picked up whatever odd jobs he could find, even helping his mother with household repairs in exchange for money. Susan, however, grew suspicious. If Brett was earning as much as he claimed, why was he constantly hovering around, doing menial tasks for cash? Her questions became more persistent. At first, Brett dodged them, but then remembered his therapist's advice. Be honest. He finally opened up to his mother, admitting the truth. He had no job, no income, and mounting pressure to maintain the facade. He begged her for financial help once more, swearing he was still searching for work. Susan was shocked and disappointed, but agreed to support him, unaware that his desperation was pushing him toward a deadly plan. Chapter 10. The birth of a criminal plan. Susan Ryan had reached the limit of her patience, deeply disappointed in her son's life choices. She was appalled that Brett had failed to finish university or build a stable future. She refused to give him any more money and threatened to expose the truth to Kristen, the woman Brett was soon to marry. Her words struck like a dagger. Brett was consumed with fear. He panicked at the thought of losing Kristen, of ending up homeless again, of crawling back under his mother's roof in disgrace. More than anything, he dreaded being seen as a failure. And in that state of desperation, a monstrous idea took hold. Because his criminal record barred him from legally obtaining a firearm, Brett decided to purchase a crossbow, a weapon that could be acquired without raising suspicion. He found a used one and paid in cash. The next day, Brett returned to his mother's house, under the pretense of helping with some repairs, in exchange for money. Chapter 11. The Bloody Massacre. The morning of August 25, 2016, Kristen woke early and left for work as usual, unaware that her fiancé had crafted a deadly alibi. Brett stayed behind, pretending to work from home. To avoid suspicion, he rigged a device to simulate keyboard activity and scheduled emails to be sent at specific times, giving the impression he was online. Then, slipping out of the house, using the fire escape, and dressed in a disguise complete with a wig and mask, Brett made his way to his mother's home. Once there, he removed the costume and entered through the front door. Again, Brett tried to reason with Susan, pleading for financial help, but she remained steadfast, telling him to come clean to Kristen, or she would do it herself. Their argument escalated rapidly. Alarmed by Brett's volatile behavior, Susan excused herself and secretly called her eldest son, Chris, begging him to come over to help defuse the situation. Meanwhile, Brett stepped into the garage, but not by chance. He had hidden the crossbow there in advance. While trying to assemble it, his mother unexpectedly walked in. In a burst of rage, Brett grabbed the nearest tool and struck Susan twice, once on the cheek, once near the ear. Stunned and in pain, Susan screamed. A violent struggle ensued. Mother and son wrestled across the floor, knocking over objects in their path. Eventually, Brett overpowered her, grabbed a dirty rag, and strangled the 63-year-old woman to death. The reality of what he had done began to sink in. This was not the perfect, clean execution he had imagined. It was chaos, and he remembered Chris was on his way. Brett now faced a terrible choice. Chris would see his mother's body and know instantly who was responsible. Panicked, Brett decided to eliminate him too. He reset the crossbow, waited in the garage, and as 42-year-old Chris entered the house, calling out for his mother. Brett crept up behind him and shot him point blank in the back of the head. Chris collapsed instantly. Brett dragged his brother's body next to their mother's and covered both with a tarp. Then he ran to get his bag of clothes to change and flee the scene. But before he could escape, 29-year-old AJ, the youngest of the brothers, arrived for a visit. Brett froze. If AJ discovered the bodies, he would undoubtedly call the police. Brett felt trapped and decided to kill again. He followed AJ silently, crossbow in hand. His plan was to ambush his younger brother, just like he had done with Chris. But this time, AJ sensed danger and spotted Brett, armed and ready. A life-or-death struggle erupted. Brett managed to shoot AJ in the neck, and though seriously wounded, AJ fled, leaving a trail of blood as he collapsed in the driveway. Inside the house was yet another brother, 39-year-old Leland, who had been napping, unaware of the carnage. AJ's screams woke him. Looking out the window, Leland saw his injured brother lying outside. Panicked, he rushed to call 911, but Brett wasn't finished. He attacked Leland with violent fury. A brutal fight broke out, wrecking the house from room to room. Somehow Leland managed to escape, while Brett was momentarily distracted. He crawled to a neighbor's home and collapsed on their doorstep. The neighbors immediately called emergency services. Meanwhile, Brett stormed into the yard and spotted AJ, still alive and attempting to crawl to safety. Determined to finish him off before he could raise the alarm, Brett gave chase. Chapter 12. The finale of the bloody drama. As Brett pursued AJ, he suddenly noticed that Leland had alerted the neighbors. It was over. The police would soon arrive. There was no more time, no more escape, no more hope of getting away with it. The dream of a perfect crime had collapsed into madness, resigned to his fate. Brett walked back into his mother's house, calmly took a drink of water, and sat on the porch waiting. When officers and paramedics arrived, they found Susan and Chris dead at the scene. AJ, though still alive, was critically injured. He died en route to the hospital. Leland, though wounded, survived and was rushed to emergency care. In time, he would recover. Chapter 13. The shocking truth for Kristen Brett. Ryan was arrested at the scene without resistance. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves through the community and devastated Kristen, who had known nothing of the web of lies, the criminal history, or the sinister double life her fiancé had been leading. Chapter 13. Kristen's nightmare. And the fallout. Brett was arrested at the crime scene and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The shocking news reached Kristen just 3 weeks before their wedding. For the first time, she learned the horrifying truth about the man she had planned to marry. His criminal past, a prior robbery conviction, financial ruin, unemployment, and now the cold-blooded murder of his own family. Devastated and unable to comprehend how she had lived under the same roof with such a monster, Kristen immediately canceled the wedding. Upon returning to their apartment, she discovered a bizarre contraption that Brett had built to fake an alibi. Unaware of its true purpose, she panicked and mistook it for a bomb. Calling the police in terror, law enforcement swiftly evacuated the building and examined the mysterious device. It turned out to be harmless, but officers were stunned by the intricacy and inventiveness of Brett's setup. They couldn't help but acknowledge his intelligence and determination traits, tragically misdirected. If only he had applied his abilities to something positive, he could have made a meaningful contribution to society. Chapter 14. Confession, Trial, and Sentence. At trial, Brett chose to plead guilty and struck a deal with prosecutors. In exchange, the charges were partially reduced to include second-degree murder. Trying to lessen his sentence, Brett claimed he had only intended to confront his mother, hoping she would finally understand him, and that the crossbow was meant only as a threat. He insisted he never planned to harm his brothers, who had simply arrived at the wrong time. But the prosecution painted a different picture. They argued convincingly that Brett had taken the crossbow with the full intent to kill his mother. They believed he had made up his mind long before entering her home, and that the murders were deliberate and calculated. In the end, the jury sided with the prosecution. Brett was convicted of first-degree murder for killing his mother, and second-degree murder for the deaths of his 2 brothers. He also received an additional 10-year sentence for the attempted murder of Leland. The court handed down a severe punishment, 3 life sentences to be served concurrently, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Leland, the only surviving brother, welcomed the verdict with a mix of sorrow and relief. Despite the immense loss and pain, he acknowledged Brett's remorse. In Leland's view, Brett wasn't evil by nature, just tragically lost. Somewhere along the way, he had chosen deceit over truth, and that single decision led to a chain of irreversible events. Epilogue. A cautionary tale. The tragic story of Brett Ryan serves as a powerful warning. It illustrates how even small lies and buried truths can snowball into catastrophic consequences. Lies build upon lies until they spiral out of control, destroying not just the liar's life, but also those of the people around them. Brett had every opportunity to turn his life around after his first prison stint. He had Kristen's love, support from his family, and the chance to rebuild. But instead, he chose to seek a path that ultimately led to bloodshed and devastation. Whether Brett's remorse was genuine or simply an attempt to soften his punishment, only he knows the truth. What truly matters now is whether he will use his time behind bars to reflect, grow, and if possible redeem himself in some way. This case is more than just a crime story. It's a reminder that honesty and responsibility are not optional virtues. They are essential to building a meaningful life. Trust, communication, and mutual support are the foundations of every strong relationship. Had Brett embraced these values, things might have turned out very differently. Let this story remind us all, our greatest treasures are the people who love us. Cherish them, respect them, and above all be honest, because the first lie we tell ourselves is often the first step toward a real-life tragedy.